Hello and welcome to this video with some friends we have from Mass Wildlife who are going to be showing a resource called BioMap that would be useful for middle school or high school students, in addition to many other people, to explore some of the environments around us. So I'm going to introduce both Sarah and Alec, who are BioMap outreach specialists with Mass Wildlife, and they're going to show what the resource is and how to use it in the classroom or at home. So passing it off.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to start with just a few slides for some background information. Let's see.
There we go.
All right, perfect. All right, so in the state of Massachusetts, we have nearly 3 million acres of forest, 1,500 miles of coastline, a vast network of rivers, and critical wetlands that support diverse natural ecosystems, and they provide habitat for a wide variety of plants and animals. These natural systems offer vital ecological benefits like filtering our air, cleaning our water, providing food, economic opportunities. Plus, they mitigate the detrimental effects of climate change and provide us with recreation opportunities, and all of this enriches the quality of our lives. And people in Massachusetts have spent decades protecting these incredible natural resources to help ensure that all life can thrive. However, despite significant progress and conservation successes, biodiversity is in crisis at the global, national, and state scale. According to a National Wildlife Federation report from 2018, 1/3 of species in the United States are vulnerable and 1 in 5 are at high risk of extinction. In Massachusetts, we currently have 432 species on our endangered species list. Threats to our biodiversity include things such as habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, invasive species, and emerging diseases. And all of these are being compounded by climate change. A recent UN climate report recognized the interdependence of climate, ecosystems, biodiversity, and human societies. And if we want to reverse these trends, we need urgent action and engaged people like students and teachers. And that's why we're here today to talk about BioMap, the future of conservation in Massachusetts. Just for a bit of background on BioMap itself, Massachusetts has a long history of being a leader with the development of groundbreaking conservation tools. The first BioMap came out in 2001, Living Waters, which was a follow-up, 2003, and then BioMap 2 in 2010. And over the years, these products have provided a framework for protection and stewardship of lands and waters critical for biodiversity conservation. And it's been heavily utilized by a wide range of people, from land trusts to state agencies to municipalities and others, and has been considered a trusted and credible source of information. BioMap is the result of an ongoing collaboration between Mass Wildlife and the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy. With similar missions, goals, and science-based approaches to conservation, Mass Wildlife and TNC are natural partners to produce and maintain BioMap. And with this new iteration of BioMap, we hope to go even further. Trying to find my mouse. Sorry about that. BioMap is more than a map. It is a map, it is a tool, and a vision for the people of Massachusetts to come together to strategically protect, manage, and restore lands and waters that are most important for conserving biodiversity in Massachusetts, now and into the future. And we see BioMap as broadly accessible via this link at mass.gov/biomap. It's all you need is an internet connection. And this link will bring you to our interactive state-of-the-art website, which I am now going to introduce. And take a pause here. All right, and switch over to the website. Just one moment. Get everything in order. Here we go. All right, looks like we're in business. So when you go to the link at mass.gov/biomap, you will find many resources on the homepage. And some of these resources are story maps, which I will use to introduce a bit more about BioMap, the BioMap components. So if you scroll down, you'll see there's a few buttons, and one of them says BioMap components. If you follow this, it will take you to this page. And just before we look at the story maps, a few words on core habitat and critical natural landscape, which is how the BioMap conservation targets are grouped. Core habitat identifies areas that are critical for the long-term persistence of rare species and a wide diversity of resilient ecosystems. Critical natural landscape identifies large landscapes and habitat buffers that enhance resilience, maintain connectivity, and support ecological processes. And using the story maps, we can learn more about these. So if you wanted to click on the core habitat story map, you'll see it's broken up into 6 sections for the 6 different components: rare species core, forest core, aquatic core, wetland core, vernal pool core, and priority natural communities. What makes story maps really great is that they're dynamic and interactive, and they make for a more engaging way to interact with the information than a static web page. And you can see, scrolling through this information, at the bottom of each section is a link where you can go to visit for more details about each component. And these pages will have summary statistics and additional background information. Following the same idea, we can learn about the critical natural landscape components. These are landscape blocks, coastal adaptation areas, tern foraging habitats, aquatic buffers, and wetland buffers. And just like with the core habitat story map, it gives you background on this element and provides details about the different components. This brings me to the local and regional components. One of the key innovations that have been incorporated into this new biomap is the addition of local components, which are locally important habitats. And this was based on feedback over the years since BioMap 2 that the tool wasn't as relevant to all cities and towns as it could be. This is because almost every town in the state has some amount of core habitat and or critical natural landscape, but our towns have very different patterns of developed and natural areas, so the amount of statewide habitat varies significantly across the state. The local levels, local components, they use the same methodologies and data as the statewide components, but they look at it from the scale of just each individual town. So I'll show an example to make this a little bit clearer. So we scroll through this story map, you'll see the different components take from the statewide. So we have local landscapes, local wetlands, wetland buffers, rare species, aquatic habitats and aquatic habitat buffers, and local vernal pools. So I'm going to use this slider as an example and put it in this position first. So this map shows our landscape blocks, which are a component of critical natural landscape, and they identify large intact mosaics of forest, wetland, and freshwater habitat, and they support wide-ranging species like moose, black bear, and the resilience and abundance of many other wildlife and plant species. When we're looking at it from this perspective, this is just data analyzed from the statewide scale. But as we can see, it's not distributed evenly. Some landscape blocks are more abundant in some towns than others, and many don't have any landscape blocks at all. So when we drag this slider, we can now see what we call local landscapes, which are the local version of landscape blocks. These are the same idea, most intact landscapes, except now they're just from the perspective of each city and town. And these local components, we hope, make BioMap relevant and applicable to many more communities and can help you learn more about the natural areas around you. And as we continue down this story map, then we'll encounter the regional components, and this is on the other end of the scale. Regional components identify habitats that make a significant contribution to conservations at scales larger than Massachusetts, because as we know, plants and animals, they don't know one border from the next. They're going to, cross from state to state, town to town. So BioMap includes regional connectivity data that that supports large-scale range shifts as plant animal species are moving due to climate change. And BioMap also identifies important habitats for rare species that are highly vulnerable at these regional, national, or even global scales. And finishing this story map, we'll see there's another slider example here at the bottom, where you can explore where regional rare species are found based on their scale. So that brings me to the end of these story maps. One more thing to discuss as part of the resources accessible on this website is the Habitat Restoration Resource Center. So if you go to the Habitat Restoration Resource Center, you'll see it's very much focused on active management. And this is based on the idea that land protection is essential, but it's often not enough to maintain diversity of wildlife and plants in many different habitats. So in order to help promote this idea of active restoration and management, we have several different resources. The first is a story map about why it's essential. So if you're somebody who's curious to learn more about habitat restoration and management, please feel free to explore this resource where you can learn about restoration, how it factors into BioMap, and take a look at some examples. We also have several different places that provide in-depth information about habitat and how you can learn more about restoration practices and planning. This first page, Habitats and Management Recommendations, breaks all of the habitats in the state into 3 different groups: upland, wetland, and aquatic. So you can peruse this to learn more about just the general diversity of habitats we have in the state. Or if you have a sense of what habitats are around you, you can do some targeted research to learn more about what specific habitats are in your area and what management, what threats might be out there, and then what management practices are typically used by habitat biologists. So you can see there is a large amount of web pages here. For those who are curious about planning that happens at municipal and state level, this page has a lot of information about what goes into making a management plan and what that process looks like. And this page, just as our last section for the resources on the website, this is more about specific management practices, and some of them are still in the works. But please feel free to look, for those who are interested, like what grassland bird management might look like, or invasive plant control. This is a great way to learn more about what can be done on the ground to help habitats thrive and to increase biodiversity resilience. So that brings me to the end of my tour of all the different resources.
So I think that overall there's so much there. And as I'm thinking through, like, how would you process this information as a teacher, knowing like what to present to students or helping students navigate? And I think what's cool that I don't think I'd realized until you were walking through some of the habitat restoration work, but there's also a piece around engineering design exploration in terms of thinking through some of the management practices and what you need. And remember, students don't start fires in areas without proper guidance. But I think that there's being able to focus in on what's happening in your community, but also how that relates more broadly is an exciting opportunity to explore, both for inspiration, but then to learn a little bit more and get resources. So
exactly. And in terms of learning more about what's around you, I'll scroll down back on the home page for those who want to dive into the map. I'm going to use this as a transition. You can see the map is embedded here in the home page and can also be viewed full screen. And this is my way of, we're going to switch over to Alec, who's going to give us a thorough walkthrough of how to use the map.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Rebecca. So yes, quite a lot of resources on the website, and as Sarah went through and Rebecca was mentioning, just a lot of ways to explore and really a lot of letting your passions dictate what this information can really help with is really nice. But the mapping behind this is really the big piece of implementation on the ground. So as Sarah said, you can go to this interactive map button on the top or the bottom full screen map button, and you're going to go to a new tab that looks like this. So if you're new to using what's called GIS or Geographic Information Systems or an online map like this, we're going to just do a quick walkthrough of how to utilize this type of map. But it's a really nice and useful interactive mapper that you can kind of interact with this data both on a computer or on a cell phone. So there's a lot of abilities here. This is the main homepage, if you will, of the map. You can get to that by clicking this home button here. So anywhere on the map, if you zoom in like I'm using on a mouse, you can always go back to that main statewide view here. You can zoom in and out with these buttons on the top left. And this button here that looks a bit like a compass and says my location, this is going to show you where exactly you are on the map. So if you are opening this on a smartphone device or using this, say, out in the field or out while you're walking around, you can click this button and it'll show you exactly where you are, like you're using something like Google Maps and seeing where you are in your car. This will show you what data is around you, and it's a great way for engaging with that information as you're out in the world and really connecting with the nature and what's around you. So there's some great experiences there, and then additional uses on your cell phones if you're just wanting to explore that data. So those are the buttons on the side. On the top here, we can search any area in the world. And so you can also search by just towns. So if we wanted to, our office for Mass Wildlife is in Westboro, Massachusetts. So we can zoom into that by just searching and hitting enter, and it's going to zoom right to that area. And you can see a few things showing up. We have these two colors, green and a lighter green, and you can see over on the right side this legend here. That's showing us what's drawn on the map or what's visible on this map currently. You also see this pop-up window that showed up and this outline around the town boundary, which is these lines here that we see. So it zoomed into this area and it's giving us this pop-up window about some information about that area. And that's really useful. So it's telling us some more population size and more summary statistics about that layer. And so it gives us some more information than just what we're seeing. And that's really important because that's part of that interactive feature of this map. So we can close that, we can expand it if we click that button, or we can close it with the X. And so the legend that we saw up on here, you can do the same thing, opening or closing. There is additional help buttons in here. So if you want to go back to the story maps of what is BioMap or how to use it, essentially what I'm walking through now, these are good resources as well. We'll turn the legend back on. So these are the two main elements of the core and critical natural landscape, looking at the umbrella view, if you will. If we want to see more information on here, we can do a few things to change how the map is displaying information. So for one, right now we have this kind of gray background for what's going on the ground. We can actually change what we're seeing, what is called the base map in this button here on the left side, the base map gallery. We can choose what's called a color ortho or imagery, so a satellite image to see what's going on the landscape. And if we click that, it adds a different view. And so that's really helpful for understanding what's not within these areas of BioMap that we see. So for instance, development that's around, or roads, or buildings that you're interested in seeing what's around those areas. So it's helpful in seeing, you can do also topography, so see the different landscape, or just different ones. We'll stick to this because it's easier to view on this grayer view. Now the middle button is where you can select data or choose the different layers that we have. And Sarah mentioned those different components and the different layers that we have. You can see quite a few here. So on the left side, we have these check boxes, or boxes, and some of them are checked, I should say. The ones that are checked are the ones that are currently visible. So if we uncheck them by just clicking them, you can see it changes that map view. So we want to we'll keep those on. And then we have these BioMap elements. So you can see there's a subgroup. We click that little arrow, it'll show us what's underneath there. And we have those, and it corresponds to what's shown on the legend. If we wanted to turn one of those off, we can uncheck it. And so we're manipulating what's seen there, and that's helpful for understanding and looking more specifically at each of them. And then if we wanted to see not just the elements of them, but the actual components of each core and critical natural landscape, you can see we're opening up these layers, and that's where they're seen. So we just have to check that group box, and now they're showing up on the legend, but they're not showing up on the map. And that's because this element is still checked and is above those in the order. And so we want to make sure we uncheck that box. And now we can see the different colors. And so the order that these are in this window here is the order that they're drawn on top of each other in the map. So keep that in mind as you're working with it. That order can, if you're not seeing something, there's something probably above it that's blocking it. So now we can see the different components of core and critical natural landscape and the different colors that correspond to it. And then we can click on those. So depending on your Wi-Fi connection, may take a second, but if you click on that, there you go. The amount of layers that are in that one area, so there may be multiple, or polygons, I should say, multiple polygons there correspond to different data. And you can see 1 of 2. So there's 2 of these polygons that I clicked on. It's going to say little information about each. So rare species core, and again, reminding us what that means, and a link to go learn more about that layer itself. And then information about this area specifically. So you can see some acreage in there, and then the number of species considered rare or endangered in that polygon. We click this next feature here, it'll bring us to the other polygon on that area that I clicked, and we can see it's a vernal pool core. So seeing what's, interacting with the map and seeing what's going on there helps us understand more about the information and we can explore kind of what's going on the ground through the data in this way. So you can keep clicking on all the things around it. You can see things like priority natural communities. So for instance, an Atlantic white cedar swamp, and just more information as you see. Some of them have different pop-up windows as there's different information for each of those. So those are the core and critical natural landscapes. You can also, if you are only interested in, say, aquatic things, you can just uncheck all the other ones. And now we're looking at just aquatic and vernal pools. So maybe you're just thinking about aquatic features. So there's really ways that you can personalize this for yourself. And I'm going to switch back to just the elements view. So we can take a look at the local components, which is that additional municipal level of each of these. And if we click that box, you can see the addition of that, really adding more data to each of these towns from that local perspective, that municipal perspective. There is some overlap with them. So you might find that there's some areas where they're overlapping, but they function the same way where we can click and get some more information about the data there. And it supports the statewide data, not replacing it. So we often view it in this way with the core and critical natural landscape and then the local data. The regional works the same way. And you can zoom out a little bit more to see that regional data. So you can see a lot of large corridors and large areas of rare species at that regional scale. And so remembering to zoom in and out is helpful, and understanding these, the data don't end at boundary lines, they move across these lines. So understanding both what you're looking at and surrounding area and how it impacts there. Then the last few layers that are in here, if we go back to Westboro as our example, if we scroll up on the layers, you can see one that's slightly grayed out called assessor's parcels. We'll check that on, and one called permanently protected open space. The permanently protected open space, if we turn that on, that's areas that are protected in perpetuity or permanently protected moving forward. So areas that are under conservation easement or restriction, something that's set in stone as being protected. And these areas that you can see here. And again, you can click on them and then click through and find them and get more information about those, which is really helpful. So maybe you're trying to see where a park is and who's managing that park. Well, we can scroll down and see manager or primary purpose, or how that information or how that area is being managed. And that's helpful for both practitioners or people trying to manage land, or just average citizens wanting to know what's going on around them. So that's helpful in understanding that. And then if we zoom all the way in, and the reason this is grayed out is because it is what's called scale dependent, or it depends on how far you're zoomed in. So once we zoom in far enough, you can see it now, it's visible and everything gets drawn. And these are the boundaries of every single parcel, every single plot of land across the state. works the same way. You can click on it and get some information about that. So who owns it or how big it is. And this is really helpful, again, for practitioners, people wanting to protect land or maybe buying land to protect it. And also just understanding who's managing or who owns certain landscapes is good to understand and to see around. So that's a lot of information quickly. Rebecca, do you have any questions about how to use the map or anything I just went through?
No, I mean, this was extremely helpful. I don't think I would have figured out some of these intricacies just bumping around like I normally do on websites.
Yeah.
So this is super helpful. And I was sort of envisioning it would be really cool for a school to do a project or a community to do a project on like know your biomap.
Yeah.
And like, having students look at different elements of what's going on in their town and doing that investigation. And I can't wait to do this for my own town.
Yeah.
One question I had, not on this map, but on the main webpage, there was a note at the top around login. Is that something that people need to log in for an account, or is that like a back end?
Good question. Yeah. So on
Go ahead.
right, this part, sign in.
Sign in. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, no, you don't need a login to access the website.
Yeah,
That's the short answer.
Yeah, it'll transition well. This is connected what's called ArcGIS Online, which is the main GIS software company.
Gotcha.
And so if you have there it goes. If you have which I do, I'm just not signed in. If you have a subscription to it, you can link to it. There are free subscriptions, and I was going to show that as well. All our data is available on Arc Online, which is there are free versions.
Yeah, why don't you show that? Because sometimes students like to see that back end of everything.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, I can jump. Before I jump over to that, there's one more section of the interactive mapper.
Okay.
And then I'll switch to the other maps because there's a lot of resources that you can utilize. But that's a good question. So this is free and accessible online, all of these versions. And that's really great. We see that really useful for nonprofits, municipalities, land trusts, anyone that doesn't have this accessible GIS software, and students as well, right? Being able to utilize that. And so what's really powerful about this new interactive mapper, as you said, wanting to poke around and see what's going on in one specific area, we've added in what's called the summary report in this third button here on the right. So let me turn these off real quick. And I'll turn the local back on. Zoom out just a little bit. So if we go to the summary report, this is where it's allowing you to get information about a specific area within the map. So maybe you're interested in the entire town of Westboro. So maybe you're working for the town and you want to know, just give me a summary of all the information within there. You can search the name as I just did here in the place name, and it's going to highlight that area. Then we're going to click report. It's going to take a minute or two to go through each of this. And once it does, you can click this print button here. And that's going to allow you to create a PDF and then print that PDF. So for instance, if you're someone that works for a town and is doing grant application or looking for this to be added into your open space plan, you can make a map, which if you hit this print button, it'll open up a window that looks like this. And you can see it adds in a map, and it has some summary information about all the biomap data that's within there and just some information about that. So the acreage within each of those polygons within each of those components of biomap. So that's summarizing it at the whole town level. And this map is created, including the legend that you see there and the scale bar. That's created based on how it's set right before you hit that print button. So make sure you have it all set, the layers that you want to see, and kind of the view. It takes a little bit of time to check. And it also has different layouts. So maybe you're printing it a larger scale where you want to have, so that one was a landscape. So I could have a landscape map. If I wanted a portrait map, I could choose portrait. It just chooses the different sizes. And you can also, within this window, once it's all finished, if you click the plus box, it'll show you each one, and then you can click on them and it'll show you within the map where those are. So that's really helpful if you want to summarize an area and then go right to, say you're interested in priority natural communities. You want to jump right to that area. It's now highlighting it in the map for you. So we find that really helpful for users that are utilizing this map to explore. So that's at the entire town level. If we go back and go to draw this and then hit start over, this allows you to select areas within the map by either drawing a polygon So if you click this left box here, and then you can see on my mouse, it says click to start. And then I'll start to drag a line as I'm going around and clicking a certain area. So now, and then I double click to finish, and then it can run a report for just that area. So we find that useful if maybe you are looking at a protected area and you want to say, okay, I want to do a report for just this area. I'm going to just kind of trace the outline of this protected area. Maybe you're thinking about a park or your yard or something that's protected in the area. Okay, great. Now I did that quickly, but something like that. And then hit report. And so that can be really useful in looking at one specific area. You can also, if you hit start over and instead turn on the parcels layer, you can select individual parcels and run a report based on the parcel level. So if, again, we wanted to look at this area, instead of painstakingly drawing that area, I can press down and draw. Now it's going to select that area. It also, if you hover over this, it'll tell you, you can select multiple or remove a selection. So if you want to have multiple in there. So for instance, like that, now we're adding in some more parcels and then we can hit report. So just to give you an idea, there's a lot of usability of that feature, and you can explore quite a lot. So for instance, we often will say, put as an activity, you could have say, okay, let's build a park somewhere in this town, or I want you to find an area that would work for building a park. Give me reason as to why that would be. And you could use the summary report tool to say, well, there's rare species or there isn't rare species here, so that would be a good area. Or there's a lot of uses for that. But just in showing that it as a free accessible tool, it's really helpful for understanding more information in a really quick way. So I know that was a tangent from ARC Online, but that kind of sums up our interactive mapper. And this interactive mapper is really helpful because it has those pop-up windows and it has that summary report tool, so you can get some more information. But there are quite a lot of online mapping resources for the state of Massachusetts that users across the state utilize. One of those is called ArcGIS Online, and that looks like this. So if you go to arcgis.com, it's going to bring you to this window. You can pay for a subscription. There's $100 for an annual subscription that gives you the whole mapping system and online features. But for free, you can also have a free account and do these things on your own. I haven't signed in for a free account, but you can register for your own if you go to pricing or just search free account. But if you go to map, this one in the middle. So I'm not signed in, just as a public user right now. It'll open up this map viewer is what they call. It has a lot of features that are similar to what we just explained with the interactive mapper because they're using the same system. But the way that you get right now, there's no data in this map. What's great about these maps is you can search a whole host of resources, a whole list of data that aren't in our mapper, but are global or within the state. So the way you do that is in this top left, there's layers. You go to add, there's what's called the Living Atlas, which is mostly stuff done by Esri and has a lot of really interesting and really cool things like temperature forecasts or just really big scale and interesting research data sets that are great to explore. And there's a lot of resources and story maps about those. Then there's also what's called ArcGIS Online. So this is all free public data that's available online through ArcGIS Online. You can see over 10,000 items that are available. And what we're going to do, you can see I've done this before. We're going to search BioMap. And you can see there's going to be a lot of things that come up. And this is where it gets a little tricky. For one, the new iteration is just called BioMap. So we want to make sure we're selecting the new versions of the data. We also want to make sure we're selecting the ones that are from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. That's the head of our agency and department. And that's who's managing the data essentially. So you can see we have to add them in by themselves. So we can, we have local components. We can hit this plus button. It's going to add it to that. So we just go through and we find each of those and we see, okay, this is some other data that someone's maybe utilizing. We want to just find the right layers there. I'm just adding them to and you can see as the map's changing, it's adding that information. And I'll stop there. But you can add, what's great is you can add other things. So maybe you're interested in roads. You can look for roads and add a layer that you can see the interaction and overlap between roads and biomap data, or infrastructure. Maybe you're thinking about buildings, or you're thinking about engineering, or building a new area and want to consider the environmental impacts. You can look at the overlap of other data sets, and there's just a heck of a lot of information on ArcGIS Online that you can really get into.
Well, and it's a good reminder too, when you mentioned
Yeah.
about making sure you're going to reputable sources in terms of who you're choosing from, but also I imagine we don't want the Manitoba road network if we're looking at Massachusetts.
Yeah, as you see. So I just searched roads, and that's not going to get us there, right? That's a good point. And so it can be hard in this ArcGIS Online to figure out who's putting out the data and which is the right or the original source, I should say, right? And so that's where this other state mapper comes in, what's called Mass Mapper. And that is a online interactive mapper that is run by the state and has all of the statewide data sets. So you can, looking at it, it's trusted, it's directly from the state or through the state. And the biomap data is available there as well. It has less functionalities in terms of the kind of interactive features that you have in ArcGIS Online. But it is really useful, and it is where you can download the data as well. So if someone's really, really interested in GIS or wants to pull this into a bigger software system, they can download the data from MassGIS and pull it into a mapping system there. But this is a great resource for free use and usability of the map.
Great. Well, I think you guys have covered both how to use the materials, how to navigate, where to find sort of the inspiration and the content. And I could see this being used in lots of different ways to inspire, learning in general, but science fair projects specifically. So I'm excited about that. Is there anything else you feel like it would be important for teachers or students to know?
That we are accessible for questions.
Yes.
There is an email that's on the website, Alex, showing where you can find it right now on the Connect with Us page. Questions, feedback, stories. If students do use it for their projects, we'd love to hear about it. And if you email that email, Alec and I both get those messages. So we try to respond as quickly as we can, and we're here to answer questions and just kind of be the eyes and ears on the ground for folks who are using BioMap.
That's great. I love it. A lot of times students are looking for mentors or coaches. And while I don't think you can support in that way, just having that professional contact and that ability to ask clarifying questions, or if students have just need to understand where could I find more information about this or whatever, it's great to have that connection.
Exactly. And thanks for giving us the platform to share with this audience.
Yeah, no problem. So thank you very much. Again, if there are folks who are watching who end up using this, please let us know. And we'd love to share those stories as well. So thank you. And I think that is it. Great.
Thank you.